Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go. It's the early version on a Tuesday. We moved it up. And thank God for the great listeners that follow this show. This is the American Sports History Podcast, hosted by a brother, a mentor, and a friend to me, Peter Ray in Cleveland, Ohio. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing about 2,500 miles to the west of him in Los Angeles, 347-205-9631. If you happen to miss it, we realize 30 minutes goes by quick. Catch the archive version, blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports podcast platforms, where you subscribe to podcasts powered now by Mancini Media. So without further ado, more of him, less of me. Let me lay the red carpet down, put the podium in its place, hand off the mic. The threes, Peter. How are you? How can people get a hold of you? And, boy, you're bringing a great author in today, and I'm going to sit back and run the board for you, my friend.
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter, J.REA, and you're absolutely right. Tonight's guest is the author of an amazing baseball book, or even baseball card book, from 2020 called The Wax Pack, On the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. Welcome to the show, Mr. Brad Balukjian.
Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate you having me on.
You know, I saw your book being advertised when it came out in 2020, and I thought, oh, I've read so many baseball books. I've read too many, but the cover, which is based on the design from the Topps 1986 baseball card packs, just kept in my thinking about it, and so I got the book, read it, loved it, and I thought, you know, it's amazing. You had an idea of from your youth, when you were really into baseball, 1986, to get a pack of baseball cards, and then open it up, and then try to contact the guys from the pack around the country, plan a trip, and put an itinerary together, and go travel the country and meet the guys from the baseball card pack, and over a period of a couple months, and you did it, and then write a book and have it published. I thought, this is incredible what this guy did.
Yeah, and I kind of did it in a weird order, right? Most people would probably want to have a book contract already in place when they went off on a harebrained 7-week, 11,000-mile road trip, but I didn't do it that way. I basically did it the way you described it, which was had a crazy idea and went out there in my 2002 Honda Accord and drove the whole summer to track these guys down. And then after the fact, tried to get a book deal, which took some sweet time, but it all paid off in the end. But yeah, it was, I always say ideas are cheap, ideas are easy, but execution is the separator, right? And so it's easy to have a great idea, but to actually follow through with it, that's where it gets hard. And I'm really glad I was able to make it happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's what I was saying. People have ideas all the time, but nothing comes of it usually. And this was a big project, and so it took you 5 years, right, to finally get it published.
Yeah, I took the trip in 2015, that road trip, and didn't come out till 2020. Didn't get a publisher until very early 2019, and so I think I got rejected 38 times in terms of trying to get a publisher. But ended up with the University of Nebraska Press, and they did a great job. I'm very grateful to them. And then it was really gratifying, when it came out. It came out in peak pandemic, so my book tour was scuttled, but it ended up a lot of people were home and reading, and so the book actually really took off, and it was really, really satisfying to see it become a best book of the year by NPR and really kind of take off.
I see on Amazon you got some reviews, Bob Costas, Tim Kirkji, and George Will. Wow, really good. Now some of the guys, one of the chapters I really liked was on Rick Sutcliffe, because he pitched for Cleveland, and then he became disgruntled here. I was young back, I was in my 20s, early 20s, and he wanted out of Cleveland, because the team was no good and they couldn't pay him and so forth, and And I thought, oh, I don't like Rick Sutcliffe, and then he's been on TV with doing national games, and I thought, oh, I don't like this guy. And then you did the chapter, and I thought, oh, this poor guy had a tough childhood, losing his dad, leaving his life, but then I thought he's such a good guy, very devoted family man, and he was very accommodating with you. So I thought, you want to talk about your time with Rick Sutcliffe?
Sure, yeah. That's kind of one of the points of this book, right, is that we all form our impressions and perceptions of these athletes based really on secondhand knowledge, whatever's written in the media or our perceptions of them from watching on TV. And sure, so you might have seen Rick Sutcliffe and, didn't like that he left Cleveland. And so that's mostly our understanding of these players, because they're guarded in terms of how well we get to know them as people. That's very intentional on their part. And so really what I wanted to do in this book was to understand who these people were beyond baseball. Who are they as men, as human beings? What shaped them? And so that's the approach that I took when I went in and met and talked to them and asked some questions. And Sutcliffe was great because, as you said, he was very generous with his time and very forthcoming, very honest. He's someone that didn't have much of a filter. And so when I started asking about his childhood in Missouri, and he was telling me how his grandparents raised him, and how he definitely paid his dues early on. There's a great story in the book about when the Dodgers drafted him, and he gets a phone call from his grandmother. And she says, "Rick, you got drafted." And he goes, "Well, was it Navy? Was it Army? Was was it the Air Force?" And she's like, "No, the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team." That's the culture and the climate that these guys in the 60s and the 70s were in. Baseball was not big money. Don Carmen, who's in the book, when he got signed by the Phillies, he didn't even know where Philadelphia was on a map. Right. So, you can't imagine players today, how much society has changed and the game has changed. There's no stories like that anymore. The way that players come up is so different. And so I really wanted to document that era in baseball, and also, as you said, put some humanity to these baseball cards.
Yeah, I have Bill North on every 2 weeks, and he has a show now himself with the Mark Mancini Network, and he's been bringing on all these former teammates of his, and it's so great because it's nice to learn about the guys behind the baseball cards. And one thing I'll bring up is you mentioned in the book how your baseball card collection were in a box in your mom's house, and I thought, oh, well, that's not good. And so I thought to myself, well, what should a grown man do with his baseball cards? So I came up with a solution. I got all my cards. It took some time, but I got them all in order by year. And now every day I put a card on my desk that I look up on Wikipedia, or lately I've been looking up to see if they're worth anything. So, but anyway, I just thought, so anyway, learning about the guys behind, because we know about their baseball careers, but it's really nice to learn about players, the human beings that they are.
I'm jealous of the time you got in your hands, Peter, if you're doing that, because that sounds. I would like nothing more than to do that. But no, that's cool. I like that. You have a card a day thing.
Well, once it's set up, it took a while to get them sorted, but now it's set up. It's fun going through. I think I'm in 1970 now. Actually, cards from my brother. But anyway, so that's baseball cards. Wonderful. What it's a simple pleasure, and it's very wholesome. So. Another guy I thought the saddest chapter was on Dwight Gooden, whom you weren't able to meet. And I thought, you met his son, and I thought, and apparently, he was so famous with the Mets, and and it seems like he's still struggling, and as a famous guy, I guess a lot of these guys, they don't have as much time maybe with their kids. So, do you want to talk about meeting Dwight Gooden's son?
Right. So Dwight Gooden, as you said, I think he's one of like only 3 or 4 baseball players to ever be on the cover of Time magazine, which that goes to just, I mean, Sports Illustrated is one thing, but Time magazine, now we're talking, national, just general news, right? And so he was huge. He was, arguably one of the very most famous baseball players in the 1980s. And so when I opened the pack and I saw him in there, I thought, okay, well, what can you possibly say that's new about Doc Gooden when the guy has himself written 3 autobiographies, right? And that was going to be a challenge. So in a way, maybe it worked out even better that I didn't get to talk to him because, who knows in an hour or an hour and a half what I could have gotten out of him. But it ended up being that I spoke to his oldest son, Doc Gooden Jr., and that ended up being a really novel and interesting way to tell Doc Gooden's story, which hadn't been done before. And so his oldest son really had some insight into the shadow that his dad cast and what was it like to grow up in that shadow and the effect that has. Some very sad stuff, very poignant. So I really got a lot out of getting to talk to his son and hear a different side of his story.
Okay, another guy, I was going through the names. I'm going to give you the ones that I remember well, that were the big stars. So Steve Yeager, what can you say about your time with him?
Steve Yeager, so sort of a Dodgers mainstay of the 70s and 80s, long-time Dodger blue catcher. And again, if there's one common theme in the book, it may be just the subversion of expectations. I mean, Yeager was somebody, based on my research, who came across in the press as sort of very cocky and this partier, this nightlife guy. And so that's kind of what I went in expecting. And I met up with him at his Jersey Mike's sub shop in Granada Hills, California, in the valley there, out in the LA area. And he was surprisingly disarmingly vulnerable with me. I mean, I asked him about his parents, and he grew up in West Virginia, and his dad, I think, was a truck driver or a bus driver, and ended up being an alcoholic. And he had a really tough relationship with his father, and told me about how the first time his dad came to watch him play in Cincinnati, his dad passed out in the clubhouse just from drinking, right? So, and then I could contrast that with, I got to meet Steve's son, Evan, who came in and who was in college at the time and was playing baseball, and just to see Steve Yeager break the cycle where he was doing everything for his son that his dad didn't do for him. And it was very heartwarming to see him do that, and again to see the person behind the player.
Okay, another guy you met, Gary Templeton. What can you say about your time with him?
Gary Templeton? What do you remember about Gary Templeton, Peter?
Well, he stole bases, and I think he had some. Did he have conflict with his manager, Whitey Herzog? Was that right?
Right. So most people, when you ask about Gary Templeton, say two things. One, he's the guy that got traded for Ozzie Smith,
right?
Between the Cardinals and the Padres, and two, that he had some, at the center of some controversy with Whitey Herzog, and so that's actually, that story with Whitey Herzog became one of the focal points of that chapter. So I met up with Templeton in San Marcos, California, outside of San Diego, where he still lives. And he's got a pretty nice life in retirement. He goes to when I was there, I got to hang out with him and watch some kung fu movies, and we even put on a Giants Padres game, and he was critiquing. I remember we were sitting in his living room, and he was critiquing Matt Kemp's swing and pointing out all the holes in it, and said, he should call me. I could give him some pointers. And then Templeton really opened up about what happened there in St. Louis in 1981 where he didn't run out a ground ball and the fans got on him, and he ended up getting ejected from the game and suspended from the team, and all this stuff that, you know, people knew about, but what they didn't know were some of the racial things that were said to him that precipitated his behavior, and also that Whitey Herzog had told him before the game, you know, don't hurt yourself running down the line because, you know, Templeton was already injured and didn't want him to make it worse. So providing that context for an incident that came to define him, unfortunately, in many ways, was a nice part of that chapter.
Okay, we have a comment from Kenneth from Peoria, Arizona, which is very appropriate. This interview is great. I love your shows, Peter. How about my favorite player, Lee Mazzilli?
Oh,
you met him.
What's this listener's name?
Kenneth from Peoria, Arizona.
Kenneth, okay, Peoria, out there in spring training land. Well, Kenneth, I'm glad someone else liked Lee Mazzilli, because I was a fan of his growing up. Something about his name and his baseball cards. So Mazzilli, I met up with in Rye, New York, and he's still, I don't know as of right now, but as of the time of my trip, he would make special appearances as an ambassador for the Yankees. And of course, Mazzilli, you know, maybe best known for his hit in the 1986 World Series that helped the Mets win Game 6. But sort of representative of my approach in this book, you know, these baseball players, these athletes, get asked the same questions over and over and over again by writers. And so they have these pre-prepared canned answers. So I'm sure Lee Mazzilli fully expected me to ask about the 1986 World Series, and instead I completely avoided asking that and instead asked about what was it like to be a figure skater growing up in Sheepshead Bay, New York, right? Because or something like, you know, tell me about your relationship with your brother who had passed away of cancer. And, you know, those questions, that line of inquiry creates opportunities to learn a lot more about these guys than if you just ask them the same thing that they've been asked over and over again. So Mazzilli came across great as a family man, and getting to know kind of his childhood and his closeness with his dad and his brother. And a lot of these guys, very sadly, had really toxic relationships with their fathers that really affected their careers and their lives. And Mazzilli was a nice antidote to that, in that he had a really good relationship with his dad. And so it was nice to have that balance.
Yeah, I like what you said about sports writers asking the same questions over, and then so it gets very boring, and you don't learn, and so there really is an opportunity to, especially I'm interested in like the 70s MLB and former players, and it's just if you ask different questions, better questions, you can really, that's what I find interesting, and then because we're all tired of hearing the same old stuff over and over and over.
I always say that an interview is really, the quality of an interview is determined more by the person writing the questions than the person answering them. And if you do your homework and you prepare, that's what can get you a good interview.
Yeah, so there really is an opportunity, because since these guys, so many sports writers they're just doing the same thing, and it's you're not getting much. You're getting the same, like you said. That's a very good point. Another guy that you met, Vince Coleman.
Oh, I didn't meet.
Oh, you didn't meet. Okay.
Vince was Vincent Van Gogh, I think that chapter is called, because the elusive Vince Coleman. Yes, if anyone out there listening knows the whereabouts of Vince Coleman, please let me know. That chapter was about trying to find Vince, and such a good base stealer, so fast that I kept outrunning me, and. So I went down to Jacksonville, Florida, where he grew up, and found his childhood home and his church and his school. And part of this was this book was, I mean, the book's really it's not just a baseball book. It's a book about my life, about growing up, about relationships. The theme of tracking these guys down, it's not just about whether, what happens when I get to them, but in the cases where I didn't get to somebody, it was sometimes just as interesting to write about the pursuit of them.
Right.
And Vince Coleman, just because I didn't get to sit down and talk to Vince Coleman doesn't mean that I can't try to tell a story about Vince Coleman. So in that case, I did a lot of research, found out, some of the points in his life, and was able to retrace some of his early life.
Yeah, that's what I like about the book is that it's also a travel book, traveling the country.
Right.
So you're that's what's really nice.
Well, I don't just I just turned in a second book that I wrote. It comes out next year called The Six Pack, about tracking down 1980s WWF wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik on a similar journey. And now that I've done two of these books, I would actually say that if you had to describe what kind of writer I am, I'd say I'm a travel writer first, before a sports writer or anything else, because that's really what these books are about, is being on the road and travel and the sort of describing the environments that I go to and the people that I meet along the way. And that's actually my first job in journalism. I worked for a travel magazine called Islands Magazine. That's why I have my 805 area code on my cell phone to this day. That's where I worked when I got my first cell phone.
Yeah, that's cool because we live in a big world, and it's nice to read about people's travels, and so that's a big part of the book. Another guy you met, Richie Hebner.
Yes, Richie Hebner, the grave digger. Different generation, different times. He salt of the earth. At the time was kind of winding down his coaching career for Buffalo, and I went out I'm originally from Rhode Island. I'm a native Rhode Islander, and so he grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, with some of the most god-awful accents you can hear in America come out of Massachusetts, right? That Boston accent. And so I went to the town he grew up in and met up with his brother Dennis, and then got to see Richie at McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket. And so he had a really good career. If you look at his numbers, Richie is just a really good hitter. We called him the Hacker, and really just easy, blue collar, easy to talk to, good guy. So I enjoyed that as well.
And then your favorite player, Don Carmen.
Yeah, Don Carmen, probably not a lot of company for me in the Don Carmen as favorite player camp, because he was not exactly a world beater, but I was a weirdo, Peter. I grew up, I was the little kid that liked the guys that were not the stars. I was always guys like Steve Lake and Marty Barrett and Spike Owen and Don Carmen. They were my favorite players, and so getting to write about Don Carmen was really a dream come true, and he ended up, at the risk of sounding schmaltzy and cheesy, he ended up being everything I could possibly hope for in terms of a favorite player and what he ends up being like. I mean, I think usually they tell you not to meet your heroes because you're bound to be disappointed, but Carmen was just an exceptional person. He's the one guy I'm still in touch with to this day. He's a really deep thinker. He's a sports psychologist. He's the guy that when the agent Scott Boras, when his clients go into a slump, Don Carmen gets on a plane and goes and meets Bryce Harper in a hotel room and says, "All right, Bryce, let's talk." And so he's just, most baseball players are not known for being particularly intellectual, but Don Carmen is a definite exception to that.
Okay, another guy, Al Cowens.
Al was the one guy that had passed away in the pack. He was no longer with us, and so he kind of ends the story. When I go down to Compton, California, LA area, And although I didn't obviously get to talk to Al, I did get to talk to his one of his sons and his cousin. And, he had a rough upbringing in that area, but became a really solid player for the Royals.
Okay, Rance Mullenix.
Rance, what a great name. What do you remember about Rance, Peter?
What, did he win a World Series with Toronto?
He did. Last out. Imagine your last out in baseball is walking off winning the World Series. That's a pretty rare thing, right? He was an underrated hitter for the Blue Jays in the 80s, sort of the quintessential role player, maybe a Ben Zobrist before Ben Zobrist type, and very, very heady, very smart player. And so I met up with him in the Central Valley of California, actually the beginning of the trip, and that's one of the nice things about this trip, was I got to really do things with these guys, like went bowling with Randy Reddy and watched Rance Mullenix give a hitting lesson, and went to the zoo with Don Carmen, and watched Kung Fu with Gary Templeton, went to an art museum with Jaime Kokenauer. So it was really participatory, and I got to, actually do things with these guys, and not just. And that was something that I set up in my head before the trip, was that I didn't want to just interview 13 guys in a coffee shop over and over again, right? Because the type of writing that I do is narrative, and it's meant to really put the reader in my shoes, and I wanted to be able to describe the environment and describe the place. And talking about your coffee spoon 13 times over and over again is not going to make for a riveting book. So I really tried to diversify the environment in which I met these guys.
Now, since the book came out, has there been any communication with Carlton Fisk?
Well, no. Carlton probably isn't a big Brad Balukjian fan, I would guess, based on the fact that those chapters are about him blowing me off, and the sort of gonzo techniques that I took to try to track him down, sneaking into golf clubs and lying about being a millionaire, and then ambushing him in Cooperstown. So I'm not surprised that a Hall of Fame catcher isn't, eager to contact me in the aftermath of the book.
Okay, we have some comments. Denise from San Francisco. Hello, Peter. Keep up the great work. Thanks so much, Denise. Albert from Poway. He talks about how your book is unique and amazing, how you tracking them down. Gary from Duluth, Minnesota. He's asking about your car that you drove, and he talks about your. Go ahead.
Do you want me to answer that, Gary?
Sure.
The Accord was put to rest in 2021 after logging about 260,000 miles, and been upgraded to a 2012 Ford Fusion that's already laboring a bit. So it's a hard act to follow, that Honda Accord.
He talks about your resilience and perseverance. Dalen from Chelmsford, Massachusetts, he asked if you went to Canada. I don't think you did. Is that right?
No Canada, no.
Okay. And let's see. We got a couple minutes. Let's see. What can you say about Gary Pettis? You're meeting with him.
Well, I just want to thank all those people that wrote in. Thank you, everyone who's listening. I really appreciate your support. And, these books really are meant to be a vehicle for everyone to get to experience this kind of nostalgia and so forth and storytelling. Gary Pettis, still a third base coach, and even now for the Houston Astros. Didn't get to sit down with him because that particular season, A.J. Hinch, the manager of the Astros, had a gag order on his coaches. And so I got to go see Gary coach at the Astros Stadium there, Minute Maid Park. But he was also cool because he grew up in Oakland, where I live here in California. And so I was able to track down his college and high school coaches. And even I actually taught at the time at the college that he went to, Laney College out here in Oakland. So that was a cool local connection for me.
Our guest has been Brad Balukjian, the author of the 2020 book, The Wax Pack, on the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. A wonderful travel book, baseball card book. The time has flown by. Brad, do you have any final words for our audience?
No, just thank you so much for your support. Please keep following me. I'm on Twitter at BradPackBooks, continuing to write these things and going on. And please, I encourage anyone to get in touch and love to hear from you.
Now, I think you said, or maybe wrote in your book, that you would not write another Wax Pack. Is there any chance of you writing another one, just like the Wax Pack, Part 2?
Well,
and getting another pack and opening it and traveling the country.
As I said earlier, my second book is called The Six Pack, and it's very much in the same theme. But I don't, creatively to do the exact same thing over again. I'm not that interested. I think people make that mistake, right? Trying to do the same thing again.
Well, if you ever decided to do it, I'd love to read it, but I can understand why you wouldn't want to do that. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I really love your book, and I'm so happy to talk with you about your book, and I hope everybody gets a copy. I love it. It's a wonderful, wonderful book.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much.
Okay. Next week we're going to have Bill North again, the center fielder and leadoff hitter for the coolest MLB team of all time, the Oakland A's from the early 1970s. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again so much, Mr. Brad Balukjian.